Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into something today that really flipped a switch in my brain: decentralization.
Oh, interesting.
And no, not Bitcoin or the usual tech stuff. This is about like the DNA of political power.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
We're pulling from this thought-provoking Academy of Ideas video. Can decentralization save humanity?
Mhm.
Get this. It argues that maybe, just maybe, those massive nation states we've got are a blip, and not a super successful one at that.
It's funny you should say that. The video really digs into how decentralization connects to, well, us human nature, not just politics, but how we're wired.
Right. Like for 99.8% of human history, we were in small decentralized groups.
Hmm.
99.8%. The video even uses that number. It's mind-blowing. They talk about ancient Greece, the Middle Ages, even early America was way more decentralized.
Which makes you wonder, if it was the norm for so long, why do we assume bigger equals better now?
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Why is bigger automatically better?
Well, this video argues that these big governments, they sound good on paper, right? But in reality, often bog down. Bureaucracy, inefficiency, and they just get so out of touch with the people they're supposed to represent.
Totally. It's like a giant company, right? Things get impersonal. You lose touch with what's actually happening. Nobody knows what's going on.
And the video suggests this trend towards bigger, more centralized power. It connects it to some pretty major issues we face, like political polarization.
Oh, interesting. So in smaller communities, it's easier to find common ground. Less of that us versus them thing that dominates national politics.
That's the idea they're putting forward, yeah. They also make a bold claim about political size and warfare. Wars fought in decentralized times, like the Middle Ages. Smaller, more contained, they say.
Whoa. Really? Okay, I need some convincing on that one. What's their argument?
They use the 30 Years' War, 17th century Europe as an example. Huge, devastating conflict, millions of casualties, engulfed tons of large states. The video contrasts this with those smaller, local skirmishes more common in decentralized periods.
So it's not just who's fighting who, but the size of the groups that changes how bad the fighting gets. That's
Yeah.
sobering.
Yeah.
But okay, I gotta ask. If smaller was so great, why did we shift to these massive nation states in the first place? There had to be some perks, some advantages to size, right?
Yeah. Of course. And the video acknowledges that. But it asks us to look beyond the obvious and consider if those benefits came with a cost. Maybe a cost we're just not willing to pay anymore.
Okay, you've got me hooked. We've talked history, the downsides of big structures. What about the upsides of going smaller? Decentralization. What's the big selling point in this video?
One of the most compelling points, I think, is that smaller political units have to be more accountable to their citizens. In a massive country, if you're unhappy with the government, what are you going to do? Your chances of actually changing anything feel minuscule.
It's like trying to steer a giant ship with, like, a teaspoon. Good luck making a difference.
Exactly. But in a smaller system, your voice actually matters. You're not just one person in millions. The video argues this could lead to a way more effective and accountable way of governing.
So you're more invested in your community, you see the impact of your actions more directly.
And it goes beyond just efficiency. It's about freedom, too. The video suggests a decentralized world would have way more variety in how things are run. Imagine you could actually find a community that matched your values, your political ideals. Don't like how they do things in the next town over. No problem, you have choices.
Like a giant political buffet. Something for everyone. You know, this reminds me of something we take for granted. Being able to just move if we don't like how things are run.
That's an excellent point. They actually call it voting with your feet, a crucial check on tyranny in a decentralized system.
Makes sense. A wannabe dictator can't just seize control of everything if people can just leave. They have to earn people's loyalty constantly.
And that constant competition for citizens. The video argues it would lead to more responsive leaders, better governance, more innovation in how things are done.
This is all fascinating, but be honest. Could this work in the real world? It's a huge shift from how things are now.
Huge, yes. And the video doesn't pretend it's easy. But they also point out, the way things are now, it's not exactly perfect either. Endless political gridlock, conflicts, regular people feeling powerless. Maybe it's time to at least consider some alternatives.
I'm with you on that. Sometimes it feels like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Right, and that's why I found this video so interesting. It's not about some perfect utopia. It's about getting us to question our assumptions. Could there be a different way of structuring power, a different way of organizing ourselves? Maybe.
Okay, I'm fully on board with questioning assumptions. But real-world application here. What about things like defense? If everyone's small and independent, Who stops the big bullies from causing chaos?
That is the million-dollar question, and it's something we'll definitely unpack right after this.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more on decentralization. Okay, so before the break, we were grappling with this idea of defense, right? If you break everything down into smaller pieces, more localized, who stands up to the big guys? The ones who want to throw their weight around.
It's a valid concern, and the video actually tackles it head on. They say those old school ways of thinking about defense, big armies, all that, might not work so well in a decentralized system.
Yeah, that's what I'm having trouble wrapping my head around it. What are you supposed to do? If you're a small community, what's your defense strategy?
Well, think about it. A massive army. Powerful, sure, but they can be slow, get bogged down in bureaucracy. They've got all this infrastructure that can be attacked.
So more vulnerable in a way, even though they're big.
Right. Whereas if you have smaller groups, more spread out, they can be more agile, adaptable.
Like a swarm of bees versus a bear. Harder to hit a moving target, right?
Exactly. They even use the guerrilla warfare analogy. Smaller, more mobile, using their knowledge of the land to their advantage. That's the kind of thing decentralized communities could do well. They don't have to defend these huge borders, maintain massive armies, you know.
Interesting. But guerrilla warfare, it's effective, but it's also brutal. Lots of civilian casualties, instability.
You're right to bring that up. The video isn't like glorifying violence or anything, just pointing out it's a factor, a possibility. They also talk a lot about alliances. That's key in a decentralized world.
Right, banding together like a modern day, was it the Hanseatic League?
There you go. They use that as a prime example. Decentralized groups coming together, becoming a real force to be reckoned with. Without a single massive army, they held off much larger powers for centuries.
Because they were more flexible.
We know.
Right. And they had that shared economic interest that bound them together, not just some vague idea of working together. There was a real concrete benefit.
Exactly. And that gets to the core of what makes decentralization so compelling. It's not just about smashing the old power structures, it's about building new ones.
Yeah.
Based on shared values, interests, knowing that we'd all kind of need each other.
Okay, so we've talked defense, but what about all the other stuff governments usually do? Big infrastructure projects, social safety nets, the environment. How does that work if everything's decentralized?
All good questions. And it forces us to think outside the box a little. Take infrastructure centralized system, the government plans, builds everything. One big entity.
And we know how that goes, right? Projects stall, costs explode. Sometimes by the time it's done, it's already outdated.
Exactly. Decentralized approach. Instead of one massive thing, you've got multiple communities, each with their own needs, working together on solutions that work for everyone.
So instead of one size fits all, it's more like a network.
Sure.
Smaller interoperable systems all working together.
You got it. Like the internet. Not one central control point, but this vast network of interconnected networks. And look how that turned out. Changed everything about how we communicate, do business.
Great analogy. But the internet has its downsides too, right? Misinformation, cybercrime.
Could those same problems pop up in a decentralized political system?
It's possible. Any system will have its weaknesses, right? But what's interesting here is the potential for trying new things, innovation, a more diverse set of approaches.
So instead of one basket and all our eggs, it's like we have lots of baskets, and if something goes wrong in one...
It doesn't take down the whole system.
It's
exactly. Resilience, adaptability, that's what's built into a decentralized model. And that's often what's missing now. So defense, infrastructure, we even touched on the internet as like a model for decentralization. But let's talk real world for a sec. In this world where everything's smaller, more localized, what happens to the big problems? The ones that need everyone on board? Climate change, pandemics. Those seem like they need, well, a big response.
Right. A lot of people wonder about that. And yeah, going decentralized won't magically solve those problems overnight, but it could change how we approach them at their root.
Okay, now you've got to explain that. How so?
Well, think about it. Right now, it's all about countries making deals, right? Top-down agreements, treaties, which are always tough to negotiate, and even tougher to enforce. And someone always feels like they got a bad deal.
It's like herding cats trying to get all the countries in the world to agree on something, let alone something as complicated as climate change.
Exactly. Now, picture this. Instead of just nations, you've got cities, regions, indigenous groups, NGOs. Everyone has a seat at the table.
So it's more inclusive. And the solutions come from the bottom up, not the top down.
That's the idea. They call it polycentric governance. The video argues that this way of doing things, it's more effective for these complex global issues
Yeah.
because it takes into account that different places need different solutions, and you get more creative, sustainable results when you've got everyone's input.
Tapping into that local knowledge, that on-the-ground experience,
Mhm.
it makes sense, instead of some decree from a capital thousands of miles away.
Right. And it's not just about being inclusive, it's about being flexible. The world is changing fast, new challenges all the time. We need to adapt. And that's where decentralization has a real edge.
You can try different things in different places. If something doesn't work, it's not the end of the world.
Exactly. You're not putting all your eggs in one basket. You can have lots of experiments running, see what works, adjust as you go.
This has been, honestly, kind of mind-blowing. We've covered a lot. History, warfare, how we govern ourselves. Decentralization really does touch everything. It's a very different way of looking at the world, that's for sure.
It is. But as we said, the way we're doing things now, it's not perfect. Not by a long shot. So maybe it really is time to ask ourselves some hard questions. How do we want to live? How do we want to govern ourselves?
Maybe smaller really is the new big thing. Who knows?
Maybe. But more importantly, we need to get past this idea that it's one or the other, big or small. Maybe there's a whole range of possibilities in between.
Well said. On that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. But before you go, here's something to think about. If you could redesign the world, knowing what you know now, what would your ideal society look like? What role would local communities play? How would they work together with each other and with the wider world? Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.